I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
William had faced difficult choices before, but this one demanded more than duty. With one signature, the prince ended a battle that had followed Harry through years of fractured trust, private appeals, and increasingly bitter resistance. The decree was placed before him. The room fell silent. Then, William lowered the pen, signed his name, and confirmed the decision Harry had fought desperately to prevent. His duke title was being stripped away. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William kept his hand close to the paper for several seconds after the signature was complete. The formal royal decree, an official written order giving effect to a decision within this dramatized royal process, carried a consequence far greater than a change of wording. Harry would no longer hold the Duke of Sussex title, the dukedom that had become one of his strongest remaining links to the royal structure, after stepping away from working royal duties. For the future king, that made the moment painfully personal. He was not simply changing protocol. He was removing something his younger brother had fought fiercely to preserve. Harry received the confirmation away from the palace machinery that had produced it. He read the message once, then again, and his fingers tightened against the edge of the table. For years, the title had represented more than rank. It connected him to ceremonies, family history, and a place inside an institution from which he had already become increasingly distant. Now, even that connection had been cut. He did not answer immediately. Silence became his first response, because the words in front of him carried a finality no previous disagreement had managed to create. William felt no victory. A final confidential communication from Harry had reached him before the decree was signed, and that message had forced the prince to confront the decision one last time. Harry had not simply demanded that the title remain. He had appealed directly to the bond between them, reminding his brother of what would be lost if the signature went ahead. William read those words carefully. Then he signed anyway. The unanswered question became impossible to ignore. William offered no immediate explanation for why that last appeal had failed, and Harry was left knowing that something behind closed doors had changed the calculation completely. Whatever had happened, it had convinced the heir that another compromise would only delay a decision he now considered unavoidable. Yet Harry was not the only person who had wanted the decree stopped. Another voice had entered the struggle before the pen touched the page, and that intervention would expose just how deeply this battle had moved beyond titles and into family loyalty itself. The ink had barely dried, but to understand why one brother finally signed away the other's title, the story had to move beyond the decree and into the wounds both men had carried into that room. Before William became the man capable of signing that decree, he had been Harry's brother, the person who understood memories no advisor, courtier, or palace official could ever fully share. That was what made the decision hurt. The conflict was not between strangers fighting over protocol. It was between two men whose lives had once moved side by side, until loyalty, resentment, public duty, and private disappointment slowly forced them onto opposite sides of the monarchy. William carried that history with him, even as his responsibilities changed. As heir, he was expected to protect the stability and future direction of the crown, which meant thinking beyond one argument or one relationship. Every decision now carried consequences for how the monarchy would operate after Charles, and that made Harry's remaining royal identity harder to separate from the wider institution. The Duke title had become one of his brother's last formal links to the royal world, a name tied not only to status, but to the life Harry had once expected to inhabit permanently. William returned to the confidential message after the decree had been signed. He read several lines quickly, then stopped. Harry had referred to memories only the two of them could fully understand, moments from childhood and loss that existed long before royal disagreements hardened between them. The prince held the page longer than necessary. Beneath the controlled decision was something far less orderly. The knowledge that removing the title had also confirmed how completely their paths had separated. Harry felt that separation in a different way. Speaking privately with Meghan after receiving the news, he admitted that losing the dukedom did not feel like losing a ceremonial label. It felt like being told exactly where the institution believed he now belonged. Meghan listened as he struggled between anger and disappointment, and she reminded him that he had known the relationship with the palace was changing. Harry agreed, but the finality still cut deeper than he expected. He had spent years outside working royal life while still believing one part of his old identity could remain untouched. Harry had also believed there was one final path back. Even when palace officials treated the issue as effectively settled, he remained convinced that speaking directly to William could stop the process. Their history, he thought, still had enough weight to matter. William had agreed to hear him, but not without a condition. Before any conversation about the title could begin, Harry would have to address an earlier breach of trust that the prince considered impossible to ignore. That condition had not appeared suddenly. It reached back to a specific royal gathering, where Harry crossed a boundary William had already warned him about privately. What happened there became the hidden fracture beneath everything that followed. That forgotten encounter would become the moment everyone inside the family later looked back on, as the point where reconciliation stopped being difficult and started becoming almost impossible. The decree did not begin with lawyers, titles, or palace procedure. It began with a conversation that lasted less than 10 minutes. Months earlier, during a private gathering connected to a Windsor family commemoration, William pulled Harry aside after noticing a confrontation developing around future royal roles. No cameras captured what followed. No formal statement mentioned it, yet that brief exchange became the trigger that transformed years of tension into a decision neither brother could later undo. Harry had arrived at the Windsor family commemoration dinner, already carrying questions he no longer wanted answered through advisors. The gathering was meant to ease family tensions and create a controlled space where old disagreements could cool, which made what followed even more damaging. His concerns centered on his children, and whether they would continue to be treated as genuinely connected to the royal household as the monarchy changed around them. For Harry, that question was about belonging. For William, it touched directly on the future boundaries of the institution he was preparing to inherit. Harry challenged his brother privately before the evening could settle. He accused William of allowing palace structure to replace family loyalty and demanded to know whether rules now mattered more than blood. The prince listened, but his patience hardened when the argument returned to access, influence, and status. He told Harry that trust could not survive if every private disagreement became another struggle over royal position. Harry pushed back immediately. He believed distance from working royal life should not erase the identity he had carried for years. William then said what Harry had feared hearing. He asked his brother to stop using the Duke title as leverage whenever disputes arose over access or influence. Harry did not soften. He answered that the title was his, that it represented something no palace reshuffle could simply redefine, and that he would fight to keep it if anyone tried to take it away. The words landed heavily, because they turned a family disagreement into a direct challenge over authority. The argument did not disappear when the brothers separated. A private written summary of the encounter was later added to William's briefing papers, preserving the substance of the exchange as part of the institutional record. That mattered because the confrontation was no longer merely remembered differently by two angry brothers. It now existed inside the formal process surrounding future decisions about Harry's status. William still left one door open. He gave Harry a final condition: prove privately that reconciliation mattered more than the privileges attached to his remaining royal position. No public statement was required. No humiliation was demanded. But Harry would have to show that restoring trust came before preserving leverage. Harry's response would bring them face to face again. Months of restraint collapsed into one final meeting, and when William and Harry entered that room without aides beside them, neither man could hide behind palace language anymore. Harry arrived believing there was still something left to save. William arrived knowing the decision was almost made. No aides sat between them. No press secretary softened their words. For the first time in months, the two brothers were forced to confront the issue without statements, intermediaries, or carefully prepared language. Harry asked him not to sign. William listened. Then came the sentence that changed the emotional temperature of the room. This stopped being about the title a long time ago. William kept his voice controlled, but the meaning was unmistakable. The meeting was Harry's final direct chance to influence the decision before the decree moved toward approval. For the prince, the problem was larger than one dukedom. He was being forced to separate his duty to protect the future monarchy from the instinct that had once made protecting his younger brother feel automatic. Harry understood that tension, but he also understood what losing the title would look like from outside. The institution surviving while his place within it was formally reduced. Harry leaned forward and told his brother exactly what he feared. If William removed the dukedom, people would see it as proof that the crown had finally been chosen over family. The prince pushed his chair back and walked several steps away before answering. When he returned, his restraint had hardened. He told Harry that years of mistrust had made every agreement temporary. Promises had been followed by new arguments. Private attempts at peace had repeatedly become battles over status, access, and control. Harry had prepared for that response. He placed a written proposal on the table, offering concessions in exchange for keeping the title. The document set out limits he was prepared to accept, and assurances he believed could protect both sides. For him, it was proof that compromise was still possible. For William, it exposed how far the conversation had moved from brotherhood into negotiation. He looked at the proposal, but did not immediately take it. William then mentioned another document. A formal summary already existed, outlining the conditions under which Harry's remaining title could no longer be defended. That paper mattered, because it pulled together the earlier Windsor confrontation, the failed reconciliation condition, and the growing concern that another temporary agreement would only postpone the same conflict. Harry went quiet. For the first time, he understood that he was not negotiating against a decision still forming. He was confronting a process that had almost reached its end. Harry had made his final personal appeal, but emotion alone could no longer control what happened next. The brothers had said what years of distance had left buried, and neither had walked away satisfied. The next battle would not be fought brother against brother. It would be fought inside the structure, determining what William could still save and what he believed had to end. William opened the file alone. This was where emotion became consequence. Inside were years of disputes, private compromises, ceremonial questions, and warnings about the growing gap between Harry's royal title and his life outside official duties. Yet one page held William's attention longer than the others. He read it twice, closed the folder, then reopened it. The decision was no longer simply whether Harry deserved another chance. It was whether William believed another exception could survive. William reached the section marked Royal Status Review and slowed down. The review was a formal internal process used in this dramatized account to examine whether a royal style or title still matched a person's relationship with official crown duties. That distinction mattered because Harry now lived largely outside working royal life, while still carrying a title closely associated with the institution. For the future king, leaving that gap unresolved risked confusing the public about who represented the monarchy officially and who acted independently from it. William stopped when Harry's name appeared again, He asked to be left alone for several minutes and returned to the same page without turning it. The language was controlled, but behind it sat memories no document could measure. He knew what the title meant to his brother. He also knew that keeping it had become tied to arguments over access, influence, and the limits of royal identity. The problem was no longer whether he cared about Harry. It was whether caring could justify preserving a compromise that had repeatedly failed. Charles entered later and found his son still holding the file. He did not give an order. Instead, the king spoke quietly about the burden of leadership and told William that delaying pain did not always prevent it. Sometimes delay simply allowed the same wound to deepen. The monarch understood exactly what that meant, because the choice would affect both his sons. Yet he refused to take responsibility away from the heir. Charles then made the position unmistakable. He would support William's judgment, but he would not command him to remove Harry's title. That left the prince facing the consequence alone. If the decree went forward, no one could honestly say he had merely followed his father's instruction. The signature would belong to him. William returned to the decisive page. It recorded Harry's refusal to accept the final reconciliation condition offered after the Windsor dinner. Trust had to come before the privileges attached to his remaining royal status. That refusal closed the last route he had believed might allow the title to survive. William finally set the file down. The decision had escaped the private room, and within hours Harry would learn that losing the dukedom changed more than the words placed beside his name. Harry expected the title to disappear from official language. He did not expect how quickly everything around it would change. The first revised briefing arrived before he had fully processed William's signature. His formal designation was altered. Future ceremonial references were rewritten. Invitations carrying the old styling were withdrawn for correction. Harry stared at the new wording and understood something brutal. The decree was not waiting for him emotionally. The institution had already moved on. Harry read the revised material slowly, stopping where the old form of address should have appeared. Royal titles affected more than introductions. Within this dramatized process, they shaped precedents, official wording, ceremonial placement, and how a person was identified on formal invitations. That was why the change felt so immediate. What had once looked like a single decision on paper was now appearing everywhere, turning an emotional loss into something practical and impossible to ignore. Harry received another corrected invitation later and placed it face down almost immediately. The gesture was small, but Meghan understood it. She watched him sit in silence before finally asking whether he regretted fighting so hard to keep the title. He did not answer at first. Then he admitted that losing it was painful, but what troubled him more was the cost of the fight itself. Years of arguments had hardened positions that once might have been repaired, and now even victory would have carried scars. Meghan stayed with him as that realization settled. She reminded Harry that he had defended the title because he believed it represented his connection to the family he came from. He agreed, but he could no longer pretend the battle had been only about identity. It had become tangled with resentment, pride, and the need to prove that distance from royal duty did not mean complete exclusion. Now the fight was finished, and the silence afterward felt heavier than the struggle. Harry then learned something he had not expected. William had personally instructed staff to handle the transition without public humiliation. The prince wanted the wording changed, but he did not want unnecessary announcements or gestures designed to make his brother's loss more painful. He also rejected a proposal that would have accelerated several secondary restrictions connected to ceremonial access, drawing a clear line between enforcing the decree and turning it into punishment. William's restraint did not restore what Harry had lost, but it changed the meaning of what came next. The decision had been severe, yet it was not revenge. That distinction opened one final door between them. The title had gone, the consequences were spreading, Yet the most important conversation was still ahead, because the brothers finally had nothing institutional left to argue over. Something changed after the decree. Not publicly, not ceremonially, privately. William and Harry met again, with no aides, no briefing folders, and no document waiting for a signature. For once, there was nothing left to negotiate. Harry had lost the title. William had accepted responsibility for taking it. The argument that had consumed them was finished. What remained was harder. Two brothers sitting across from each other, forced to consider whether anything existed beneath the damage. Harry knew before the conversation began that nothing he said could reverse the decision. The decree had already taken effect, and that changed everything between them. There was no title left to bargain over, and no institutional advantage to protect. For the first time in years, every sentence could be personal rather than strategic. That made the room quieter, but not easier. The conflict had lost its official purpose, leaving only the hurt underneath. Harry spoke first. He told William that the hardest part had not been seeing the old title disappear from formal wording. It had been knowing whose hand had signed the decree. He could have accepted rejection from advisors, committees, or palace officials more easily. But this had come from his brother. William did not interrupt. He understood that distinction because it was precisely what had made the signature so difficult to give. William answered with equal restraint. Signing the decree had not felt like victory. It had felt like admitting how far apart they had become. The prince told Harry that he had spent too long hoping one more compromise might repair what distrust kept breaking. Each delay had preserved the argument without restoring the relationship. When he finally signed, he was not celebrating control. He was acknowledging that the institution could no longer carry a family wound neither brother had been able to heal. Harry then admitted something he had never said during their final confrontation. He had almost withdrawn his appeal before entering that meeting. Part of him already knew the fight had become destructive, but pride and fear kept him pushing forward. Letting go had felt too much like accepting that his old life was gone. William carried one revelation of his own. He told Harry that a private letter sent during the dispute had never been added to the official file. He had deliberately kept it outside palace documentation, because some words, he believed, still belonged between brothers rather than inside an institutional record. Harry went silent at that. Nothing was restored. Nothing was reversed. But something softened. By morning, the private pain of two brothers became a public event, and one headline transformed a family rupture into a national argument about identity, duty, and the price of belonging. By sunrise, there was no containing it. Television banners carried William's decision. Commentators debated whether the decree represented discipline, tragedy, or the final collapse of a royal relationship years in the making. But one image captured the moment better than any studio debate. Outside Buckingham Palace, people stood reading the same enormous newspaper headline: William signs, Harry loses Duke title, while the monarchy inside remained publicly silent. William watched a short broadcast summary without speaking. The coverage treated the decree as an extraordinary break with the familiar pattern of royal disputes, because this time the consequence was not temporary distance or another altered duty. The title itself had been removed. That distinction mattered. It gave the public something clear to judge. And within hours, the argument split in two directions. Some saw a future king drawing firm boundaries around the monarchy, while others saw a brother closing one of the last doors Harry still believed connected him to royal life. William switched the television off before the segment ended. Hearing years of private pain reduced to headlines and studio debate left him visibly unsettled. The prince had accepted the institutional consequences of his signature, but he had not expected the emotional story to become public entertainment so quickly. Every discussion returned to the same contrast: duty against family, control against compassion, stability against loyalty. He knew those words were too simple for what had actually happened between them. Harry faced the same storm from the other side. He unfolded the morning paper, read the enormous headline once, and then lowered it. Anger did not come first. Exhaustion did. For years, the fight over his royal identity had consumed conversations, appeals, arguments, and private hopes. Now the world was discussing the ending as if it had happened in a single dramatic instant. He understood something painful in that moment. The battle he had spent so long trying to win was finally over, whether he felt ready or not. Then the public framing began to shift. One broadcaster highlighted the fact that William had blocked additional punitive measures during the transition, explaining that the prince had drawn a distinction between removing the dukedom and deliberately humiliating his brother. Palace wording reinforced that line. It confirmed the institutional change without personally condemning Harry, making clear that his official status had changed while his family connection had not been formally erased. The distinction mattered to both brothers. William had chosen finality without revenge. Harry had suffered a public loss without being publicly denounced. That did not erase what had happened, but it changed the emotional meaning of the decree. The headlines would fade, and the crowds would disperse, but the meaning of that signature could only be understood when the anger, titles, and public noise were finally stripped away. In the end, Harry did lose the title he had fought to keep. William did sign the decree he once hoped he would never have to consider. There was no last-minute reversal, no hidden clause restoring what had been removed, and no ceremonial escape from what the brothers had done to each other. Yet the deepest meaning of the moment was not written beside either man's name. It was found in what remained after the title disappeared. Harry faced the final reality without another appeal. The decree stood, the official records reflected William's decision, and the Duke of Sussex title, that had carried so much emotional weight in this dramatized account, was no longer his. For the monarchy, that created a clearer boundary between formal royal authority and family membership. A person could remain connected by blood, while no longer carrying the same official position inside the crown. That distinction had become central to William's reasoning, because he believed the institution could not survive endless confusion between private family ties and public royal responsibility. Harry gathered the last correspondence connected to his fight and put it away. He did not prepare another challenge. He did not search for another route around the decision. For the first time, accepting the loss became more important than resisting it. The title had once felt like his final shield against complete separation from the life into which he had been born. Now he faced the harder task of deciding who he would be without it. William found no satisfaction in that surrender. The prince had achieved the institutional clarity he believed necessary, but victory felt painfully empty because the person who had lost was still his brother. He understood that leadership had demanded a boundary, yet that knowledge did not erase the personal cost of enforcing it. The signature had solved one royal problem while exposing another truth. Authority could settle status, but it could never command trust. Harry and William had finally reached an understanding without restoring what had existed before. Their private exchange did not repair years of hurt, but it ended the cycle of bargaining, threats, appeals, and repeated disappointment. Neither man had won everything he wanted. One lost the dukedom he had fought to preserve. The other lost the luxury of believing difficult leadership could always be delayed until everyone was satisfied. There would be no second decree and no final appeal. William had chosen the future of the crown. Harry had been forced to accept the end of his title, and the monarchy moved forward, carrying a painful lesson neither brother could escape. Sometimes the most final royal decisions are not measured by what they remove, but by what they reveal. Titles can preserve rank, they can define position, but they cannot restore trust once trust has been broken.